Ladies and gentlemen, in this Gaming Silicon video, we're going to be talking about the Polaris GPU, specifically about yet further rumours concerning what potentially we could be seeing under the hood of the graphics card, as some details concerning the size of one of the GPUs has been unveiled thanks to a LinkedIn leak. So LinkedIn has definitely been a source of information for various companies recently, and I imagine a lot of the tech companies who have been employing these individuals are probably not too happy about it. However, a user over at Beyond 3D Forums found a LinkedIn profile of a senior engineer over at AMD. Now, multiple projects are listed under his itinerary, but one of them is a Polaris chip which is measuring 232 squared. This is once again assuming that this information is accurate, and obviously this is only one of multiple Polaris GPUs that of course AMD are working on. For example, we already know about Polaris 11 and Polaris 10, and we'll go more into that in just a moment. So why is it that we know that it's Polaris that this engineer has been working on and not some other GPU? Well, there's a couple of reasons. The description, obviously rather brief, says, and I quote, dGPU project F, global Foundry / Samsung 14 LPP 430 blocks 232 squared, as full floor plan designer, as top leader team, take responsibility of manual feed through insertion and lead pin assign and repeat insertion, etc. Project is ongoing. Being familiar with the latest leading technology. Now, the reason this is really critical is because the fact that, well, it's Samsung / Global Foundries with a 14 nm FinFET low power process node, which is pretty much bang on for Polaris. Obviously, previously they were not using this particular node, and secondly, it's dGPU, which is obviously a discrete graphics card, and let's face it, AMD are not working on anything else in the background unless, of course, something really funny is going on in their company. So all of this leads to the fact that this is most likely a GPU that AMD are fabricating in the back end. Another thing this does is actually lend further credence to a claim that AMD laid just a few days ago at a VR conference. Now, you may recall that essentially the issue with virtual reality, at least according to AMD, is quite simple. There's only a certain number of PCs out there which are capable of running virtual reality headsets, because the minimum requirements for VR are quite high. They're a GTX 970 or an R9 290 or equivalent. Now, obviously, you could certainly cobble together something a little less. For example, you could have a SLI rig of, say, I don't know, a GTX 780, and then you'd potentially be fine, maybe some VRAM limitations, but even so, this does limit the number of PCs ready-made out there which are capable of running the system. If you count the GTX 970 and R9 390s and those type of GPUs, then you're looking at around 8 million PCs. However, once again, there are certainly other sales which you would have to take into account. Regardless, this does chop down the number of headsets which you can actually sell to consumers, basically the total available market. Now, that was comments from Roy Taylor over at AMD. However, what he did say is that they're aiming to alleviate this issue by essentially reducing the price of the GPUs for customers. So essentially what they want to do is make cards like, for example, the GTX 970 in terms of level of performance cheaper. So for example, they might make them $300 or $250, something along those lines. And one of the ways they can do this is this: they can die shrink. Now, this not only means that more transistors can be placed in the same area, in other words, they can be simply packed in more. I guess you could say it's almost the equivalent of letting air out of an object before you pack it away. It simply means that the bouncy castle can be packed into a castles into a warehouse if you let all of the air out first, but it also means that the economies of scale are much better as well. Essentially, it lowers the cost of production. This means that, at least theoretically, you should get better yields, because AMD are still using a 20nm backbone for this 14nm LPP process. What does all of that mean in layman's terms? It means you get better yields and more volume when you can ship it. This basically means that when you have higher yields for an item, let's say for the sake of argument you are shipping a graphics processor or a CPU, it could be any item. Basically, when the silicon is being fabricated, when it's being manufactured, when it's being produced, there are a certain amount of duds. So for the sake of argument, let's say you have 1,000 of these GPUs you produce and 100 of them are crap. They just can't be used. They don't run to specification. Well, that means that 1 in 10 of your products are essentially null and void. Now, what you may be able to do is then you may be able to separate them. You may be able to say, well, I'm going to create a secondary tier of product. So for the sake of argument, let's say that you have 2 in 10, so 1 in 5 of your cards or of your product has, let's say, is able to run at, say, 20% slower clock speed. You could potentially make a secondary product tier there, and then you could sell that off, and then you'd simply disable the, I guess you could say, the broken processors that, you know, originally were going to be part of this product, and that's called speed bidding. So a simple example, let's say that you produce a processor and you're aiming to have, let's make it really simple and say it's got 1 processor core, and let's say that you're aiming to get that processor out at 3000 megahertz, 3 gigahertz. Well, let's say that, I don't know, 1 in 5 of those processors do not manage to run at 3 gigahertz. Let's say 1 in 5 run at just 2.6 gigahertz. Well, you could have a secondary product tier through speed bidding, which means that those products can then run at 2.6 or what have you, and then you can sell them and have a secondary product. That's essentially one of the things that AMD are doing here, because you've got better yields, which means more of their volume can be shipped, which means you can price the product at lower cost, because it means that you're basically managing to move higher volume. Finally, it's worth noting that these claims from the engineer and the claims from various members of over AMD, for example, Raja Kadori on Twitter, he put out a tweet which says, and I quote, "Polaris is 2.5 times brighter today than when Panatomy," hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's P-T-O-L-E-M-Y, E-M-Y, yeah, observed it in 169 AD. What this basically means is obviously they're giving hints of what they're going to be able to put out, which is pretty damn impressive, and it does theoretically lead to roughly the levels of performance that one could assume that these dies are putting out. Finally, and this is probably the biggie, we don't know where this card actually comes into the product lineup. It's probable that this is a completely different GPU than AMD have been talking about, and remember that there are multiple tiers, multiple different graphics cards which AMD are putting out, which are break down into various Polaris architectures. Essentially, all AMD are doing here is not only are they putting out different speeds and different amounts of shaders and all of that, but they also want to make it so that the cards themselves have different setups. So for the sake of argument, they know that not everyone needs like an input on their card, or not everyone needs true audio on their card, or not everyone needs X or Y. So what they're basically doing is that they could better reduce the cost and be able to sell cards at a cheaper price and be able to better, I mean, their idea is that they want to be able to better inform the customer of what they're getting. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. It's been a bit of a shorty, this one, but still, hopefully you've enjoyed it. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.